at the Ala Loop Temple when Prabhupada first came, and I remember I had to wash the driveway, and I had a lot of water, was all in the driveway, and then I was excited to see Srila Prabhupada because after reading his books and after reading Bhagavad-gita, I was anxious to see the Acharya, the Guru, and when he came in, I remember his look. He didn't seem very grand or great or very significant, but I just sensed that there was something special about him because of what he had given to us in Bhagavad-gita. So then he walked in, and the devotees made a comment that one devotee, hey, Srila Prabhupada said something about the driveway with all that water in there, So I later went back to Sudama Maharaj and asked him, what did Prabhupada say about the driveway and all the water? He said, water is very purifying. And that's my first contact with Srila Prabhupada. And then he gave the lecture the next day, and I asked him a question after the questions. I asked him the question, where is the soul in the body? Is the soul in the heart, in the area of the heart, or in the lotus of the heart? Because I had read so many yoga books and saying the soul is in the lotus of the heart. So I just wanted some confirmation from Srila Prabhupada. And he, I'm sure many devotees have heard this lecture where Prabhupada goes, what are you, medical man? He says, why do you want to know in so much detail? What are you, medical man? And then he went on to say, what does it matter? So much detail, the soul on the left, on the western side, on the eastern side, just read my books, So the devotees thought that I was like a little set back by his so boom into me, and I said, no, that was very ecstatic. I thought that was great, so. Anyway, then it went on where that I think the following day was going to be my initiation, and during the initiation lecture, Prabhupada said he invited everyone that he's going to cook the Sunday feast, and me, I was into like raw vegetables. I would go down on Sankirtan with raw peanuts, and devotees used to like kick me out of the kitchen because I said, how can you eat like that? All these bad food combinations and this and that, and I was sticking to my raw peanuts and raw cabbage. I would have it in my bag, and that's all the only way I would eat. And at evening I would come back and take some hot milk. But Prabhupada said he was cooking the feast, so I said, I'm going to have to eat this feast. It would be very offensive if I don't eat it, And so it came time where the initiation was going on, and then I believe Gajahanta got initiated, Danadar, there was a few devotees that got initiated that day. And you go up, you say your 4 regular principles, chant 16 rounds. But before I could say my 4 regular principles in 16 rounds, Prabhupada goes, so many lifetimes, hogs, dogs, camels, and asses, you try to enjoy your senses, Just take this one lifetime, control your senses, and go back home, back to Godhead, And he goes, your name is Sri Raga. Sri Raga means attachment to Krishna, and then everybody jive. But it was a little lengthy little lecture he gave. I guess he knew me from Hawaii, out on the beach and chasing the opposite sex and doing not so much nonsense. Later we went on to, more familiar with the philosophy, and I am now a prasadam addict. I couldn't wait for the next Sunday feast. They had so many good cooks in those days in Hawaii. And Prabhupada visited, a few times, and sometimes he would stay length, but there was this one time when Srila Prabhupada came, I was outside working living outside the temple, working as a security guard. And my neighbor, he was a florist, and I heard that Srila Prabhupada was coming, and so I was, well, I gotta make some kind of offering, So as I went to work that night, I went to the neighbor's refrigerator, which was in his garage, and I wasn't thinking like I was stealing it or this, but actually that's what I was doing. I was a thief, and I was stealing these flowers. And but I took a huge box of carnations, and I took it to work that night, and I made a garland that was, would come down to like below Prabhupada's knees. And so I spent that night. So the next day I went to the temple. I brought the whole box of flowers to the temple, and Lakshman, the pujari, had taken all the flowers, and he had decorated the altar. There were flowers all over the floors. The deities were garlanded with, everything was very beautiful. And Srila Prabhupada's Vyasa, they decorated nicely with all these pink and white, Hawaii carnations. They're very fragrant carnations. So when Prabhupada came in, he, offered his obeisances to the deities, and I had that long garland in my hand, and I asked the temple, when Prabhupada went to the Vyasa, I asked, you think I could put my garland on Srila Prabhupada in my security guard uniform? You think? He kind of discouraged me. I don't know, but anyway, I went up anyway, and Prabhupada had like garlands like up to his nose, it's like, So I went up and I took my garland and I put it over his shoulders, and I took all the other flowers and I put it up on his lap, and then I offered obeisances. And Svatantra, one of the devotees that was there, he said that Prabhupada just looked at you, and when you were offering your obeisances, and he watched you, so Svatantra thought that something magical was going to come out of that long glance by Srila Prabhupada observing me in that way. But anyway, I'm still here. But Prabhupada, when I offered my obeisances and got up, Prabhupada, he took my garland and he took it off. And I kind of went, And then he took all the other garlands and he put them to the side. And then he took my garland and put it back on, And I felt pretty much, I guess, I don't know what you would say, maybe proud or just astonished or something, And then, so Prabhupada, he gives the lecture, and this was like, it was like what do you call those lectures when Prabhupada comes and he's just an arrival lecture, or arrival speech or something, Then in that speech he said that if we neglect to see the deity so nicely decorated, he said our hearts will become black, And he went on to say that, the lecture went on more and more, and then at the end of the lecture he goes, even if you're a thief, and if you take and you give to Krishna, you will benefit, So anyway, the next day I went to the Kapilani Rose Garden, and then I took the most fragrant roses I could find. I picked all these roses and made another garland, and still in my security guard uniform, Prabhupada went up to greet the deities. He walked up, and then I stepped out. Then he turned to me, and he was just this, I know so many devotees have described this smile that just blows you away with so much affection. And so I put that garland on Srila Prabhupada, and he went up and he sat down. And so again, he took that garland off, and he told Shrutakirti to take that garland like upstairs to the room. He's like, he gave you identity. Everyone is looking for that, for some distinction, some adoration, And he gave that, he gave you that identity, and he gave you the affection you need to, what we're always looking for. We're always looking for affection, and he gave it as more than what you needed, so it carry you through the times when you're full of anxiety. But he was powerful like that. You can see that love is the power. That affection was very powerful, and he was expert. With expert in loving dealings. He was capable of not putting the darkness into the association. It was just always pure spirit, pure love. So that's what I always saw in Srila Prabhupada. He was always that just a beacon like that. It radiated from him. He was always, and it was very powerful, very, very influential, and it was a spiritual influence. So the morning, we went to a morning walk on Magic Island, and when when we were out there, I couldn't pay attention to the conversation that was going on, because growing up in Hawaii, I used to I surfed my whole life. It was like born in the water there, and like body surfing when we were like 2 or 3 years old, and surfing, that was like very and was very attached to that activity. It was so much fun. And so that morning walk, I'm watching the waves. The waves were up. It was about 6, 7, 8 foot waves at Ala Moana, right off Magic Island there. So the whole time I'm glancing over and looking at the waves. Oh my gosh! After this morning program, I'm going to head out. So we all, we did the walk. I can't remember one thing that was about the conversation on the walk. But then when we came back to the temple, the Srimad Bhagavatam class, Prabhupada gave the lecture. I can't remember what verse, but he did mention, he said, just like those boys out in the water, what do you call them? Suffers? And everybody laughed when he said suffers, and then someone in the audience goes, oh, surfers, Srila Prabhupada. And Prabhupada laughed. He goes, oh, I call them suffers. And he went on to say, now I heard, because I wanted to go surfing that day, but I heard that day that when he was speaking, he said, if those boys out in the water, if they spend their whole time surfing and not cultivate Krishna consciousness, they will take birth as fish. Now that was on the tape, but what I heard, I don't know, maybe there was a special mystical addition in there where I heard Prabhupada say, if you spend your whole time surfing and not cultivate Krishna consciousness, you'll take birth as fish. So later when I went back to my house, Kailash Chandra, oh, you remember what Prabhupada said, you can take birth as a fish. I said, well, I heard that if you spend your whole time surfing and not cultivate Krishna consciousness, you'll take birth as a fish. So then I went, grabbed my board and head out to the beach. Anyway. There was Sarva Satya and Kailash Chandra and myself. I said, oh, I'll help you guys bring these. They were making these fabricated marble, and they were thinking they were going to make deities out of this synthetic marble. So I said, I'll help you take it up to Prabhupada's room, because I wanted to see another, something new about Srila Prabhupada, because he was always refreshing and always doing something, progressive in his stay with us, So I went upstairs to to see, help them bring those. And Govinda Dasi came up, and so Prabhupada came out of the room, and Govinda Dasi said, well, Srila Prabhupada, we have this synthetic marble, we can make deities. And Prabhupada goes, will it break? And he said, how will you ship? And he said, well, we could ship plain. And Prabhupada goes, will it break? And Govinda Dasi said, well, Prabhupada, I think. He goes, Prabhupada stopped there, goes, I think? I think means I don't know. And he walked out of the room. And that was the end of the conversation. I was, like, wow, So that was quite amazing. Well, he was expert. Srila Prabhupada was expert, as far as knowing what to say, knowing what to do. I always saw him as expert. I used to tell my mother was, she was very doubtful in the beginning of when I first joined the movement. She said she used to pray to Jesus that I would leave the Hare Krishna movement. But as I was chanting and following the process, she began to recognize that I was changing and I was improving. And so this is, I always felt that type of confidence in Srila Prabhupada, that I would always improve and everything would get better. He had, I used to tell my mother that there's, you look at other old people out there, and there's no older person or teacher that could ever compare to the presence that Srila Prabhupada had. He had a presence that was very potent and very inviting, that was very welcoming. And you always felt that he understood you, that he knew who you were. Like Prabhupada said one time, they asked him, Prabhupada, you have so many disciples, do you know them? And Prabhupada would say, I know their very heartbeat. I know the very heartbeat of my disciples. So in that way, you always felt that he knew you, and there was always a link and a bond, especially after initiation. You feel that link. You always felt cared for, in a sense that he knew what the greatest welfare was for humanity. And in his voice, he was always so convincingly speaking. So you felt that he was speaking the truth, and he wasn't, telling you fairy tales or some, moral story that comes from books that, to teach you lessons. He was teaching you the full truth of anything, that particular subject matter. He was like that, potent in that way. Je anilo